I do appreciate everybody being here. And Mark, I just want to say we have not. We want you to be a part of this group. We're honored to have you with us when you've been here. So thank you for joining us, and we're glad you've been able to. And we certainly understand where you've been. And appreciate that. But Janice, I know you've got some statements we need to read as a reading into the record, and as a reminder that this is being broadcast and recorded.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is our final subcommittee meeting, meeting 6, and I just appreciate each of you. Well, remember, our conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on the development of new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula, while all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly. Documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant of the Tennessee Public Records Act and be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. All right.
Thank you for that. And let's scroll down to the agenda. We've done that. And if we would have opportunity to call the roll. Janice, do you have the roll for us there, please, too?
Yeah, happy to. So you'll just say hello. Mark Florence.
Hello.
Dr. Gary Lilly.
Hello.
Dr. Steve Barnett.
I'm here.
Chad Moorhead.
I'm here.
Diane Elder.
I'm here.
Rob Britt.
I'm here.
Russell Dyer. I think I saw him on.
I see him there, yes.
Okay. Michelle Simcox.
Here.
John Barker. Senator Paige Wally. Representative John Reagan. All right.
Thank you. We do have the majority of our guests here, and I appreciate that as again as your service. If we want to go ahead and flip down our next slides, Janice, would be great, please.
Yes.
Today we just want to make sure that we review our input from meeting 5, and I know that was sent to you within a day or so, maybe even if not that day, when we met, making sure that as this is our final meeting, this is our final opportunity to roll information up to the steering committee based on the new framework. So if there are things that are not included that we need to make sure are there, or anything that you've seen, I know we received that last round of public comment and a few things there. I've received a couple of emails even as late as this morning. And just if there's anything that you want to see that we have not included for the final committee to be able to see in the review, we need to get that recorded today.
Yep.
Next slide, I believe. So this is surrounding the policies that we had talked about, and those ideals, and I hate to call them business rules, but those things that will guide the business rules surrounding some of the input that we've received so far. And so
yeah, so I've got a couple of documents I'll have. If you would like to reference back to the draft, I can keep it kind of snug over here if that's something you want to connect back to. Then we've got a couple other documents. One would be the policies that we were working. I'll scroll up, let it make you sick. All right, so this is today. I'm just iterating off of last week from meeting 5, and I'll update our attendance there in bold. And yeah, so if you wanted to, these were just some of the clarifying recommendations. If it's in red, it was in our last meeting.
right. And so just as some reminders, we've got a couple of folks with us that were not here last time. The clarification of educator salaries because of the law that was changed in the last special session, in the January special session last year, that talked about the true definition of a teacher and how that impacted the definition of raises and things that the legislature meant when they approved salaries and raises. So we talked about clarifying all references to either teacher salaries or educator salaries. And so checking on that, we asked them to do that. Weighting and district funding, we've had conversations on those. We didn't really have any points that we want to make sure are included there. Does anyone have anything that they just absolutely want to make sure gets stressed to the steering committee in those two pots of weighting or in direct funding? Ms. Janice, I've heard 2 or 3 times, but I guess it doesn't hurt us to include this. There was some discussion on charter schools and where charter schools appeared as a weight in several places. Would this committee entertain at least a statement that we want to ensure that charter schools are not double counted? So we're not talking about an additional weight for charter school students, that this is a weighting for anyone who's in a charter school, but they wouldn't be counted twice if by some weight. So it's not that they're getting a value for the one that they are and then an additional weight because they're in a charter school. I've heard the department say that over and over, but I guess, are we as a committee good at recommending that and making sure that that is clarified?
Danny, I am good with that. That is not the way I understand it. I mean, why would you break out charter as a separate weight to highlight on the framework if it was not going to be additional? I mean, we're not breaking out everything else, on the framework. So if that's the intention, it is confusing. And also, I do think it's interesting that one of the things that has been said all along is lots of states are doing the student-based funding formula, and we have benchmarked against those other states. From what I can tell, no other state is doing separate weighting for charter school kids. So maybe a little duplicitous in what we're saying as far as we're benchmarking other states, but this is something brand new that we want to do.
I agree with Gary, everything he said. And I also have heard one of the reasons is because they may have to lease or rent a space. Well, all of our buildings cost money. All of our buildings cost, they're a capital expense. So I'm not sure the reasoning behind pulling that out separately. It just doesn't make sense to me.
And one of the steering committee, or I think steering committee and chair conversations, and Dr. Weeks, you may be able to help clarify. The commissioner spoke to it's more of a consolidation or to move it to include it in one funding stream because it currently is separate. So it's the idea of wanting to consolidate into one formula all the funding for anything that's currently outside of the funding formula. So I don't know if that helps clarify or not. As you're mentioning that, it makes me wonder just make sure I've captured that correctly here, what you're saying. And if you're wondering if it should go as a direct or just, let me know what else you're wanting to say there.
I think to Steve's point would be if that is considered facility money or any expense on facilities that public schools don't receive any funding for facilities, and so if it is for facilities, then public schools ought to receive the same thing. Steve, does that kind of capture?
It does, and I'll give you an example. We may have a situation where we have to add some portables. Their school systems have to add. What if you had to add a whole grade level and you had 6 teachers on a grade level and you needed 6? You would add those. You'd have to find that money to add those. And that's definitely a capital expense, even if it's temporary, while you're raising and figuring out how you're going to build onto a building or add a different school. That happens throughout the state. That happens throughout the state, especially in school districts that are growing. So,
right.
If that helps.
Mhm. Does that kind of speak to that? Just making sure I'm capturing it.
I believe so.
Does to me.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, so I don't want to belabor the point, but why not just say that we recommend taking it off as a weight? I mean, it is clearly in the framework as an additional weight.
I agree.
Everyone,
I agree completely.
Okay, great.
Put that here. Does the context below provide just additional context, but this is the recommendation?
Well, basically, if the money follows the student, why would you add money to it if the student went to a charter school?
Yeah, and again, Dr. Weeks, if you have context, but what I've heard is that they're often renting spaces, and so it's for the funding that is already there to support renting the space from the district if there's a public charter. And so including that funding line into this formula and framework is what I understand.
And again, I think your statement there that we don't receive, if we need to rent any type of facilities as a public school, we don't receive those dollars either. So I think that is important. I think that matches our concern.
Well, if you're going to say that that type of funding for a public school is encapsulated in that base amount, well, when that base amount goes to that charter school with that student, that it's already in that base amount. There doesn't need to be a multiplier for that. I wasn't trying to give you more to write. I think everybody else summed it up. I was just, I guess, putting a little country on it. I don't know.
I'm gonna put an exclamation mark at the end of it. Yeah, thank you, Taff, for that. And again, I think that does stress and reemphasize what we're doing. The next box that we don't have anything in, direct funding. I know we've talked about that as kind of a flexible pot of dollars, or how to use as the district chooses. Which again, the whole funding formula, the funding framework is a funding formula. It's not a spending plan, but direct dollars that come to districts. Any comments or thoughts that we want to add in that box? Okay, seeing none or hearing none, we'll move on. Outcomes-based, we've had a lot of conversation around outcomes-based. Janice, does that also scroll to the next screen? I think we had more conversation. Maybe not.
Yeah. So this definitely pulled just in outcome specific notes, but then as you were addressing each of the policies, so items of question and clarification came out of the steering and of course across subcommittees. So that's what's pulled forward here.
Yeah. Hey guys, this is John Barker. Sorry to be late. But just the number of conversations that I've heard across the spectrum about outcomes, I'm very, very interested in, Danny, how all this goes. Everybody, that is this going to be a new thing? Is this going to be kind of connected to the A through F? Is there kind of a one or two thing? I think with Representative Reagan last week, we had some really, really robust conversation around a couple of outcomes measures. But my experience in accountability has been that, you probably need a wider range of outcomes measures, and, focusing on growth and achievement is a good thing. But that I'm just interested very, very much so to see how this goes, and whether there would be some, specific kinds of things like an ACT score. If we're talking about ACT, it is incredibly related to parental income. And, while that may be a part of a metric system of metrics that would be this new accountability kind of thing, I would definitely want us to be, all heads up and eyes open on that with anything new that might be coming down the pipe.
And I know we had discussion last time, Janice, on just, making sure that there was a strong correlation between the outcomes of the funding formula and our accountability model, so that we're not chasing 2 or 3, different lanes. We're not trying to meet one set of goals, and we're not trying to meet another set of goals for funding, that there is a parallel between our accountability system and whatever comes out of this.
I pulled back from the document we iterated off of from meeting 4 and meeting 5, and so I'm adding 6, and this is where I think you had more conversation here. So I'll send both documents. I've been sending both documents forward. We can add to it today in blue to layer any additional context.
Anyone see anything that we want to make sure that either gets emphasized or is not clear or has come to your mind since that point in time?
I will make, looking back and seeing in our notes to add JROTC and athletic programs and things. Smaller systems with smaller schools are not eligible for an ROTC program, and that would just automatically rule them out along those lines. So I just think we got to be careful what we put in there, that we're going to give funding for outcomes on, to make sure that it's available to all, and not just larger or even focus on smaller systems.
Going back to what John was talking about too with ACT, I wonder if it would be, what do you all think about if we had ACT, but then the school system could be rewarded for growth in that area? So you had a baseline year, freshman year, and then how did they do their sophomore, their junior year? And like we talked about last week, or I did, maybe their senior year, if they want to take work keys or the ACT, take it over, or go switch over and do work keys. I don't know, would that be helpful?
Here comes Representative Reagan. Okay, so school system reward based on growth, example, between growth.
Yeah, they're the names of the tests. I can't remember what they're called. We haven't done them in so long. But if you had the 9th grade, you spend a lot of time. Go ahead.
It's the work key suite, so we'll know exactly what we're talking about there.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess it also includes like retake, right? You're saying if they do a retake.
Yeah, and it's a norm referenced assessment, so you can do value added a lot easier really than you can with our current model.
Gotcha.
Will certifications, is that part of the outcome? Like, so for instance, for work keys, would that lead to a NCRC certification?
Not sure I know, but you could give space for it if it does.
Janice, we want to insert the word work keys right above after assessment suite, such as work suite or work keys.
Yeah. That's a little more clear, maybe.
Yeah, we can clean that up if we need to.
Certainly. Yeah, so I think that,
Yeah.
let's go back to see if there's anything here. So we were toggling between multiple documents last time, and can make sure this was in the base and hang tight. Yeah, so we captured quite a bit additional there. Flexibility. Gotcha.
So let's go ahead and scroll down toward those policies, make sure yeah.
Here we go. And you want to scan through, and then I think we landed on, where were we? Reporting? We were coming back here. Do you want to scan back? Oh,
Yeah, let's take some time to look through.
there we go. I'll scroll when you say ready.
So again, committee members, if you'll look through those, definition of economically disadvantaged, poverty, sparsity.
We didn't really spend a lot. I don't know that we had conversation here, but just to pull it forward in case you're interested on thinking about students per square mile, the federal definition would be 10 students per square mile, and but the range is here. So if you're good, I mean, in Tennessee, if we want to stay with federal 10 students per square mile, or if that would be worthy of a increase. I'm not sure when the range is activated.
I think the commissioner clarified that for us last time, that was the range that she had seen as recommendations coming up through committees. That's the way I understood her comment.
You all may have talked about this last time when I was unable to attend, but can somebody explain, like, what is, compare and contrast the definition of sparsity with rural? What is, would rural not imply sparsity?
Not necessarily. So there's a federal, I think there are many definitions of rural, but we go by a federal definition. And let's find that where it's mentioned here. There we go.
I'll give you an example while she's trying to define it. I think we've used Hickman County, which is just south of me, many times. Rural, they would probably not meet the definition of rural because of their proximity and mileage to Nashville and to Williamson County. However, it's one of the, if not the largest land mass counties, but their school system only has, I think, 3,000 students. So the disbursement of students, the sparsity of students, how many students are located within square miles, producing unique challenges on, how many buildings, how long students spend on bus rides, and even though they are, probably in that MSA of Nashville, 30 minutes from Nashville, they are, they're probably a suburban area, but yet it's very sparse.
Okay, thank you.
Janice, did I cover that? I don't know if that's technical at all.
Yeah, and I think it is a little, it gets a little confusing between the two, because you may not be rural, but be sparse. So I listed in the chat the NCES kind of definitions where it details out what's noted here for fringe and distant and remote. So I think here, the way it seems like it's been recommended so far is kind of pulling that together. So that could be for this group to discuss as well, thinking about an additional weight for small/sparse LEAs. you may be, that you don't necessarily, just because you're sparse, you may not actually qualify for rural.
So
So-
does this include, if you have a system that's rural, but they maybe have an area that's really isolated. I think of when I worked in Oak Ridge, you had, I think Anderson County has Bryce, Fulton, some of these towns that are just, you have to go across mountains to get into these areas. So they're really, the people, they're kind of clumped in that area. Johnson County has some of that, Michelle. So you kind of wonder, it's hard. It's really difficult for those students to travel all the way to their city that's in their community to go to school and back every day, several miles. Is that, is there a wait for that in a system where they have a school or a community like that, or does it have to be the whole system?
Well, I think that's what this is, sparsity is trying to get at, and it may be that it just needs a little more to be pulled or separated out here because they may not be rural, but to your point, the cost of operating to go get students, your bus may pick up, 20 students in a square mile, or they may, they have to go further out to get their students. So I'm wondering then if federal definition is 10 students per square mile, what does it benefit districts to have that expanded or defined to be 15 or 20, just to give credit to what I think I hear you saying is that sparsity to have to go get students.
Yeah, and Janice, toward that end, I just threw a piece out there. I was not necessarily familiar with this, but it's like just a quick Google search. I was like, okay, so what about sparsity? And it pulled up this piece from Britain in the UK, and it's talking about sparsity to Steve's point. I think, the distance from school. So it's like if you're farther away, there would be more costs. And it's interesting to kind of think about this, right? So it's a measure, and they actually define it in this particular article that's out there, Schools Week. The piece, but just to think about this, that we are all kind of tuned into the fact, I think, that there's a measure that's going to be needed, and as Steve pointed out, the mountainous regions, so 10 per square mile or 25 or whatever like that. It just looks like our example from the UK is the distance from the school. So it's like if you're farther than so and so, you get an extra.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To get on a road and drive there, not just that direct distance.
Right.
On a map.
Gotcha.
It's actually how long and how far is it if you get in a car? I was in Sullivan County, you had a school, an area that they closed, but to do a home visit, it was one way 25 miles for me as principal. And I had to go into Virginia and then back into Tennessee, or I had to go into Johnson County and then back into Sullivan County. And it was really difficult to get to. And those kids spent the very maximum amount of time legally they could on a bus to get to school every day. And I don't know.
Okay. Is there a particular then notation or?
Janice, I'm just assuming that the steering committee that we are sending our recommendations to are going to have, and maybe are meeting regularly. I don't know how often they meet, but I assume they're having meeting and similar discussions as we are. Are you a part of those that, they'll know what we're talking about when we send these to them?
Yes.
Okay.
And yes, they definitely will. In the reporting, I just didn't know if there was any documentation. Look to see, they meet again on February 3rd.
Okay.
So they'll be reviewing any notes or so. Yeah, is there anything here to maybe make it more clear that consideration for the sparsity? I'm not sure if I heard a change in maybe what that definition would be or.
I guess, Janice, where I am with that is that this absolutely needs to be a part of the funding formula, but I think probably would want to have a the larger conversation about how exactly to measure that and do some modeling as well. So what we know is that the federal, I think our prior conversations, right, Danny? I mean, it's like, it's been, it sounds like we just stick with the federal, go 10, whatever.
Right.
But depending on what the steering committee is thinking, and, could there be some modeling that would actually say, do we benefit, and Steve's situation, where we, if you take the 10 students per square mile, does that give him more or less funding in that circumstance as to calculate the distance of those students? Because I think it would probably be pretty relatively expensive to transport. I mean, it's like if you got that 25-mile kid, that's going to be proportionally more expensive, and maybe even more so than that 10 per square mile.
That makes great sense, I think. So I hope this helps provide some context to that conversation. Just feel yes, it needs to be part of the formula, wondering we need more information to see that impact. Just
So
kind of
the reason I really brought up the question to begin with and asked for some clarification was really in my mind, I was kind of wondering, are we doubling up on the effect of being rural? Are we giving money for the challenges that our rural districts face, but then giving more money because of sparsity? And is it the same thing? And so I thought Danny's example was a good one. I realized that now sometimes it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Pick up
I think we've got salaries pretty good, so let's scroll on down past there. Tutoring, we talked about that. CTE programming, K2s. We've hit outcomes and accountability very hard, and we have notes between those two documents. Good. Reporting at the bottom of the page. I don't guess we've addressed that much. And Janice, I guess maybe somewhere in the middle of the conversation, or I want to go back to very early in the conversation when there was discussion about dollars following a student. I think the department clarified that when we moved away from that specific language to a student-based funding. Is there anything that we want to capture and make sure gets into the steering committee? It's not just dollars move from one school to the other. Just if a student has a change of address week 3 during school, it's I don't know if that's part of the transparency. I don't know if that's part of the discussion that we're having, or just clarification of I don't know. I don't really know where I'm trying to go with that, other than maybe just reminding too that this is still a funding formula, not a spending plan. I don't know if that's part of that as well.
Yeah, so just thinking through what information should be included in reporting for school and district level finances. So just the process and how it's captured. What are there any current resources that you would still want in ways that it's reported?
I mean, I don't know, directors, we post our budgets every year to ePlan. Those are all public documents, our mid-year spending reports, our end of the year spending reports. I don't know. I know that we're also required to report by school, our dollars spent per school. I don't know how more in depth we need to go than that, or if that is more than we need to do, or more than we'd recommend doing.
So kind of what I hear you saying is no additional burden, staying as simple as possible. Similar in the reporting.
So my hesitation about saying something to the effect of keep it as simple as possible. is probably kind of a thinking in context of reporting and accountability. My preference is, I mean, I don't know how we could report any more information than what we do, but
Right.
my preference would be to put whatever information we're going to report, put it out there, and not, where I'm going with this is don't lump it all together in like a single school grade. My fear would be that the steering committee would say, read that as keep it as simple as possible. Well, as simple as possible, let's just give each school A, B, C, D, or F for, you know, using school finances. That's not what we need. That's not what the public needs, in my opinion.
Hmm. I'm not sure if I should say.
How about, Janice, you did say no additional burdens, so I think that's important. We're not asking, you know, to break it down further than we are. We have that. But not to oversimplify it with a single metric. Gary, is that what you were trying to say there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would work. I think that would work well.
Does that make sense? Keep it simple. Okay.
I think the next point's the one we're all wondering about is, when does this start? What does this look like? When do we start budgeting for this? How do we work on that? How do we maintenance of effort?
Hey, Danny, I've tried to be quiet because I hadn't been at all the meetings, but I know that I was on a meeting, and that was one thing that I mentioned to Commissioner Schwinn. Our demographics, and I know a lot of rural areas like ours have 2 small schools, and if we don't continue maintenance of effort, it will be devastating to our community. And I know that's been a push, but and I'm sure that's been brought about, but I just wanted to say it again that, you know, maintenance of effort has to be a big part, because I know I already have commissioners working to try to help this reduce maintenance of effort for our county commission.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. I think if we reduce maintenance of effort, there will be some that would like to reduce the local to match what we might gain from a new funding formula increase. So I think maintenance of effort has to stay in place.
You know, I have said from the beginning, and I continue to feel pretty strongly about this, that I just do not know how you consider like passing one part of a funding formula without the context of that local contribution part. I personally just really want to advocate for, let's do it all together, because it is hard to separate out, you know, the state portion and not consider the local portion because of all these issues.
Janice, can we also add or local match? Because those are 2 separate things, I think.
Just add or local match.
Or local match, because, yeah, what Gary's describing is, you know, if we receive more money from the state, there might be local funding bodies that would try to say, well, I don't have to contribute as much in other forms that are not necessarily tied to the maintenance of effort there.
Gotcha. Okay. Anything else to connect to there?
I was just looking at the next bullet, and maybe I don't think that means teacher professional development and training. I'm reading that as what else do we need to know in terms of training for our finance directors, us as those that prepare budgets and things like that. So I mean, to me, the sooner we know, the sooner we have a model to look at, the more time we do have to discuss that with our funding bodies, our boards of education, our finance officers need all that training. I've not heard anything about fiscal training that we usually have in spring. So, those would all be important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there, randomly. So yeah, is needed training to support all of the fiscal departments, districts.
Funding bodies.
Yes, funding bodies. Yeah. Yes. All right.
Yeah, the addition of funding bodies there is key, because if there's not some training that takes place for them on the new formula, then it'll be left up to us. And my funding body doesn't always want to believe or trust the PD that I provide to them.
Mm-hmm. Just tag in and support. So providing whatever multiple layers of professional development and supports to funding bodies and districts, fiscal departments. Okay. All right, got a chat from Representative Reagan. I need to know how much is enough. That answer is not only tied to requirements for plant and personnel, but what student result is appropriate. Okay, got that. So Dr. Weeks, are there any other specifics that you may want to pull forward then for any of these? That's all.
That's what I was going to ask the committee. This is our last opportunity to provide and send that information up. So if there's something else that we've not covered, or something else just in comments, whether it's policy related or comments or others that we need to send, we need to get that recorded today.
I'll pull over. We had two documents we were working off of. This one was before we had all of our policies, so it's mostly pulling forward your base priorities, weights, direct funding, and outcomes.
Chance, I will just ask this question, and maybe, and again, as our departmental liaison, you may have heard this. Somewhere in the middle of this, I heard a lot of discussion around pre-K funding and mandatory pre-Ks and everything. And so, we talked about as directors of school that we don't have staffing for that. We don't have facilities for that right now. And I've not seen that as much in any of the second or third sets of public comment that we have received. So was that unique maybe to the first groups, or was there something going on that brought that forward, and has that dropped out, or do you know if the steering committee is looking at that at all?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I know I've heard it in several of the committees that I'm sitting on, and it's been noted. So I think just pulling forward your thoughts and needs that you would want, looking to see where that's listed in the draft framework. I think it was down in
It's on the last page under additional considerations supported by subcommittees.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the issue that I would have with pre-K is I would like for it to be funded and not a grant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because the grant has remained stagnant, the amount, while our expenses have increased. I can't go to my funding body now and say that a pre-K program is fully funded by the state, because it's not. It's only about 75% at this point. And I would rather that be a formula than a grant, so that we, if it's going to be fully state funded, and that may not be the intent, but that, you know, as our program has, expenses have grown over time between salary increases and other requirements, the grant has remained the same amount, so.
And Chad, I'd echo that. I don't know if there's an appetite for that at the state level right now, but if there is, there would certainly have to be a phase in for that, because you're additionally adding a grade to every elementary school. Most of us simply would not have the space to do that, nor the staff to do that. So it would have to be a slow and phase in process if we did that.
Well, maybe there needs to be a multiplier there, like for the facilities for charter schools, we'd have a multiplier for facilities for pre-K. I was saying that kind of.
We're right. Well, either way, you have it noted. You had pre-K and just kind of paused, so I don't know if that captures what you want, or I can certainly delete.
When we talked about it before, we did talk about what Danny said, and that was the cost and the space. So you're paying a pre-K teacher the same as you pay any other teacher in your district. You have to either lease space off-site, or you have to build on, or you have to add modular classrooms. You have to have space for pre-Ks. So there's a capital expense and also an ongoing expense for employees, not just teachers, but also teaching assistants that you need in a pre-K. And you also have to have a certain type of space to have a pre-K. So you have to have, it has to be on the first floor. There's a lot of regulations with pre-K that go with that. So the expense is there. And like you said, most of our districts are just not in a position where we have the space or the capital funding to build on, and then the reoccurring funds to pay staff, employees that need to serve in those programs. So Chad, with the charter school piece, I think there's some similarities there, like you said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's us as a committee or a group of superintendents or anybody taking a position on whether we are for or against pre-K. But it's just truthful facts about the implementation if it were to become a part of the funding formula.
Yeah, if we had the funding to do that, and for the capital and the reoccurring to have it, there's a suburban system outside of San Antonio. They built onto their schools. They added the teachers, the programming, and they were able to keep people in their community. It was a big selling point to families to stay in that community. I'd love to be able to do it, but it's expensive.
Okay.
Do one final call. Is there anything that we need to make sure gets included before we adjourn for the day? Janice, my chat box is lit, but I can't get to it. So can you see what that is?
Yes. So we had a comment from Representative Reagan around just ensuring that we are, it's appropriate, the measure. The answer is to not only tied to requirements for plant personnel, but what student result is appropriate. So thinking about outcomes and connections to impact. And then Chad had piggybacked off the pre-K funding, just thinking about any current research that's come out.
Okay. Make sure I wouldn't miss anything.
Mm-hmm. right, I'll hit save and forward these. And of course, the recording is also notes and they're being transcribed as well. So all of the conversation is captured.
And then Janice, last, you said the steering committee is going to meet on February 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
And will we meet again as a committee, either formally or informally, to respond to that, react to that, or is this our last time together?
Yeah, from my understanding, this is our last time. I could be wrong, but we'll just pause for the state of the state, so Monday night. And if anyone's interested in attending that, please let us know, and we'll be happy to save you a seat.
Great.
Yep, and so you've made it through. I so appreciate each of you. Thank you for thank you for your leadership as rings through for this committee's title, but for demonstrating that throughout and weighing in on a very important topic that's historical for us. So I appreciate your leadership, Chairman, and each of you.
Thank you so very much, Janice. You've done a great job of listening to us, capturing that. And again, I know we'll get that right after this meeting and we'll look over that to finalize and summarize that. Again, I know some of us are planning on coming to the State of the State Monday night. So if you are there, we will see you there. That'll be great. And then anything else we all need to hear or say? Any final comments? Rob Britt, you were smiling very big last time I saw your face, so we wish you the very best. So we're going to miss you.
Well, that's very kind of you, Danny. And well, I'm going to miss my good colleagues throughout the state. And but you guys are doing fantastic work. Thank you all so much. Been a pleasure. I'm going to hang around till June. So
we're thankful for that. Mark, we continue to keep you and your family in our thoughts and prayers. John, I appreciate you joining a group of superintendents and jumping right in there. You have been a valuable resource to us and helping us share the research, keeping that before us. And Representative Reagan, we want to thank you for your input and kind of keeping that perspective that sometimes we as superintendents may, see from our side, and helping us to look at things from a different angle as well. So it's been an honor to serve you guys, and I appreciate you putting up with me as well. So thank you for that. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you, Janice.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great day.